Welcome to What to Expect When You're Connecting, a podcast for IoT professionals and the IoT curious who find themselves responsible for growing, executing, or educating others about the challenges with connecting products and services to the internet. You'll learn from industry experts who understand those challenges deeply and what they've done to overcome them. Now for your host, Ryan Carlson.
Alrighty, we've got Ryan Chacon, CMO and co-creator of IoT For All. Did I get that right?
You did.
All right. Then we're here today with Ryan Chacon, co-creator of IoT For All and their chief marketing officer. So Ryan, today is a conversation around connectivity. And my first question that I always like asking everyone is, what is your relationship with connectivity?
What do you mean exactly by that when you say relationship? Because
I love the qualifying questions. You yourself, when you think of connectivity, What is it in your life?
Yeah, it's for me personally, it's more from a consumer standpoint. On day to day, it's the connection that my phone, my computer, other smart devices that I own, how they are connecting to the internet, to the network, that kind of thing. Obviously, being in the IoT space, there's exposure to it in other ways, but for the most part, it's more from a consumer standpoint.
I see the wall of boxes and consumer devices that are all behind you.
Yep.
So I've got to ask, were those something that, do you own all of those products? Have you curated those boxes? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so what we ended up doing a couple years ago, just for fun, was we did an IoT kind of smart product gift guide on IoT For All. And we weren't sure how it was going to go because IoT For All is really focused on enterprise and commercial IoT, but we got a lot of engagement from brands and companies around the holidays looking to promote their products to who kind of we consider are probably early adopters of smart technologies, are those in the industry. They understand the technology in IoT. They're more comfortable with it. So we had a lot of companies willing to send us their products to check out. And we put these just gift guides of cool things we found more on the consumer side together, and it did pretty well. So we continue to do it every year. And for us internally, it's been fun to play with new products that we wouldn't have exposure to otherwise. And this wall kind of changes year over year, just depending on the products that come into us that we think are worth talking about. And I've had people on episodes of our podcast ask if I just went behind Best Buy and just pulled boxes out of a trash can. When no, like I actually, there's stuff in almost all of them. Like the GoPro one over here, that's been taken out because we're using it, but most of the other boxes do have the products in them. They're not just for show.
That's awesome. This is one of those things that we could have started with to begin with. We're here to talk with you, but let's talk about IoT For All. How did it get its start?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I didn't really have much IoT experience when I got into the space back in 2016. And I originally joined another company that was focused on kind of build the software side, solution development, things like that. And I was brought in for marketing, business development, support, and help. And that's where my background came from, other tech companies I was with. So we were looking at what the IoT space, or I guess the presence of content in the IoT space, and we were seeing most of the content was very dense, very engineer to engineer focused. A lot of the companies we were talking externally really didn't understand how IoT could benefit their business. A lot of decision makers were not technical. So we started just writing layman term or taking IoT technology and breaking it down to layman terms, and we put it on Medium. And this was when before Medium had a membership, a paywall kind of structure. And if you remember back then with Medium, you would sign up as a new member and they would give you a ton of different people and publications to potentially choose from to follow based on your interests.
Yeah.
And we were writing content that was getting picked up by Medium, and we became one of those recommended publications in tech, technology, IoT, different kind of keywords. And we were gaining, 1,500 to 2,000 people following our publication, where we weren't doing anything promotional for the company itself. We were just writing content as we were learning more about the different technologies. And it became so popular that we realized this could probably be something that could benefit a wider audience. So we started to expand it into its own .com, open it up for companies around the world to contribute content to. And that kind of took on a life of its own as the audience continued to grow. And the people that were contributing as well as the audience really seemed to find value in it. And it just grew from there to full-fledged media company. But the fun thing has been for us is it's really stayed focused on commercial enterprise IoT and trying to approach it from a different angle than just heavily focused on technical deep dives or the technology itself to help those companies that have that expertise and knowledge to share it with a larger audience and hopefully help increase adoption.
That is a very on point angle to be taking. I find that even in 2016, almost no one had experience with IoT.
Right.
I mean, there was machine to machine, but for IoT as we know it, that was still pre-AWS IoT.
Yep.
It was right around there was when it started getting traction. So it wasn't widely adopted. And the question back then was always why IoT, not how IoT.
Right.
And yet at that time, it was all very engineer focused, trickle up economics, where it was, if we just get all of the builders, get them into our freemium model and get them building on our thing, we're going to be gajillionaires. When
or
in reality,
if we have a platform, everybody will come to our platform and figure out how to use it. And then it was quickly debunked around what a platform really is in IoT and how companies that didn't create the platform are going to actually use the platform. Because I think what we've seen is a lot of the companies that are adopting IoT didn't always have the resources internally to just jump into a sandbox and play. They were like, we need you, here's our problem, we need you to help us solve it. As great as the technology is, we almost don't care about the technology as much. We need to know, does the connectivity work? Does the hardware work? Does the platform software side work? And especially back then, there were just so many components and different kinds of technology thrown in their way that just to get started and say, hey, here is what we need to make a decision at each step of the way, from the connectivity to the hardware, et cetera. They didn't even know where to start. And it was very fragmented. It still is, but it was even more so back then. And a lot of the decision makers were not technical. So it was very hard for them to feel comfortable making an investment and really knowing exactly what the ROI would be.
I saw a lot of platforms that were solution independent.
Sure.
Right. We're solution agnostic. We're industry agnostic.
And they throw use case agnostic. Exactly. Hardware agnostic. Yeah,
exactly. My favorite is technology agnostic. And so I believe in technology. I believe it exists. Right. I just don't believe that there's any one particular technology that is the single source of truth. So we're bantering around some of the wrong terminology here. These platforms that were independent of a solution were so hard for business owners or the decision makers who didn't understand the how IoT. They're still wrestling with, well, what's the value? Could I see ourselves using it? That was a really interesting time to be observing that platform space.
I agree. I think there's still some very interesting observations that are going on now with the way solutions are marketed and sold in IoT. I think there are a number of companies that are coming around to learning how people buy software solutions, and IoT is a little bit different because there's a hardware component, the connectivity component for sure. There's customization elements to it. The use cases and the environments in which these are deployed in are unique at times. So there are specific things that potentially have to be tailored to a particular use case for that company to find value and a reason to adopt and justification for scale. But I still think in the early stages of an IoT journey for a company to make a decision on, is there a solution out there that solves my problem? The presentation of that can be packaged in a more easily understood way, similar to how we would go buy potentially another SaaS product. And again, it's not saying it's the exact same, but they just want to know, does the hardware work? Does the connectivity do what it needs to? And can I just, it's almost like an off the shelf kind of buying experience. Although, like I said, there are elements to it that are not off the shelf, but that's how a lot of people still make decisions and want to know, does this thing solve my problem? Because that's really what they care about. And is it something that we can do? The problem can be solved at the price we need it to and justify the results internally. But if they have to go through and pick each piece of learn everything about hardware, learn everything about connectivity, the software side, all the different pieces, it's too much of a daunting task for them.
Amen to that. And it gets overly complicated. The danger I see a lot of times is a lot of companies get into the weeds and they really start bantering a lot of deep technical knowledge. They may be, what they're saying is absolutely true, but for 98% of the buyers out there, it's not going to make a lot of sense, the deep cuts, right? One thing that we learned at Soracom as talking to customers, and I've had the opportunity to listen to, dozens, many dozens of client customer calls technical onboardings, and just to hear that voice of customer. Where is it that people are struggling? What are the questions that they're asking? And after doing a bit of an audit on all of the language and all of the messaging, a vast majority of the things that would be said from a marketing or public facing perspective is a lot of these deep cuts that don't have the context, when in reality, the vast majority of people that are looking, if you're going to be making a connected product, you're going to be asking yourself, do you offer connectivity? In Soracom's case, it's cellular, right?
Sure.
So do you have coverage in the area in which I'm going to be deploying products?
Right.
Number two, is it at a price that is going to fit within my business model or within what I expect? Number three is, does it provide the reliability that I need in XYZ scenario for a rural location, for a vehicle that's moving across lines, between nations or between states? Right. So they're asking that. And then the fourth one is always purely optional. And it is a hard line. Do you or do you not have security requirements due to compliance or regulations? Right. Either you do need a VPN or virtual private cloud clearing or some way of locking things down, or you don't.
Yep.
Because that right there sets a whole lot of constraints in what you're trying to do. And these are basics. And I think there's a lot in IoT where we forget that some of the most basic elements are the things that we all take for granted as like living in this space.
For sure. I think the more we can put ourselves in the shoes of those decision makers and even the end users to a degree, because the solution needs to be built for them, the better I think companies are going to find success in those conversations that they're having, understanding the needs and the real questions, the things that they actually care about, and not always. There's a line where I think you can stop when it comes to pushing the details of the technology and the components of it, because at that point it just starts to complicate the picture for them. And there are a set number of questions that these companies are going to look at, companies like Soracom and other companies on the hardware side and the software side. They're going to ask. They're the ones that have the domain experience, so they know the problem, they know the environment, but they're relying on those companies that they partner with or do business with to be able to take care of all those other pieces and make sure it plays nice with their existing infrastructure, existing systems, and things like that.
What you're talking about is so poignant in that the level of specialization that is required for the various stages within a device's design and life cycle. I interviewed Tito Bodish of Neuronic Works, and they're up in Canada, and they do hardware design and manufacturing. And one of the things that he said to me that just sticks with me to this day is just the ability to talk about certifications on when you need them, when you don't need them, and when you're going to wish you had them. They are like it's the thing that you want to have and not need it, rather than need it and not have it.
Sure.
Because it is the difference between a carrier saying, oh, you've got 25,000 of these devices on our network. Yeah, it's doing something we don't like. It is now banned.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, it does not work. And they're all over the world or a country, and you're sunk. So there's these little things where, is it required? No. Should you do it? Probably. In which scenario? And it's the in which scenario experience is the only way to be able to answer some of those questions.
You're exactly right. And when it comes to the security of devices and, again, just the different components, those companies that are going to be the end adopters are relying on the company they're working with to understand all those different elements, because the company that's adopting is often they care about their business, and they are looking at this as a solution to either open up new revenue streams, increase efficiencies or improve efficiencies, things like that, where they want to make sure the Soracoms, the hardware companies of the world, are taking care of those different situations through the information they're providing you in that introductory call and early conversations. So it is an interesting kind of perspective to be thinking about it. And that's a very good point that he brought up through your conversations.
So I know that you get to talk to a lot of people that are in this space.
Yeah.
And And I listen to the IoT For All podcast and I hear, here, tell me about this. And then it gets to go really deep. And I find myself sometimes going, I'm clearly not aware of this particular context. I have no idea what's going on. And sometimes there's a guest that really has an amazing analogy or breaks it down Barney style for me, where I'm like, as the audience, I'm like, I finally get it. My question to you, Ryan, is how do you explain IoT to non-technical individuals?
That's funny because I'm not someone who just on a personal level, like usually in like my friends and family group, talk a ton about what I do. It's just when I'm talking to them, we're focused on other things. But I do get the conversation when people come across, like friends of mine come across stuff I post on LinkedIn, the podcasts. 'Cause a lot of them don't really know to the extent in which I'm involved in putting all this content out and what we're really building, because they're in different industries and it's just not what we talk about when we hang out. But I've had the conversation multiple times with people, and I usually end up relating it back to kind of consumer products because that's what they know. But when I talk to them at a high level, I'll usually explain it in a way that the idea is to be able to connect physical things to the internet in some capacity. I'll bring to them examples of taking a physical device or physical asset of some kind, physical object, and being able to put some kind of sensor on it to collect some kind of data and allow that information to be transmitted up to or over the internet or over some kind of connectivity to somewhere that the data is going to live in the cloud, and then presented to you to be able to interact with on a device. And I'll be like, you have a Whoop band that you're using. That's a very similar thing. You have this sensor, it's putting on you as a person, it's collecting data about you, and it's being sent up to the cloud for you then to use it on your phone. And it's the same kind of thing across enterprise and commercial, which is where we focus a lot of our time. And I'll give them examples of that. So that's how I usually break it down, is try to relate it to something they understand, and then try to give them some examples on like the enterprise side.
I think that's so. For many years, that would be family reunion. So what are you doing these days?
Sure.
Half the time I was like, I'm in marketing, or I do product development.
You almost want to, it's going to be a long conversation. So you're like, oh yeah, I'm in the tech space.
Yep, exactly. Or, I'm in healthcare. I spent 2 years in the healthcare world.
When I first started, I would talk about, I'm working in the IoT space. And they're like, oh, I know people who work in IT also. It's not IT, like IoT, Internet of Things. And it's a rabbit hole from there. And you're like, how much time do I really want to spend trying to explain this to them? But that was always an interesting thing that happened very early on when I got into the space, is people would just assume I'm saying IT, so I'd had to start saying the Internet of Things space. Oh yeah, what's that? And that turns into, the conversation at hand.
What are your go-to consumer devices that you use to create common ground with people around what the Internet of Things is?
Probably wearables for the most part. I think it's the easiest one. Sometimes smart home products. It depends on how well I know them and what they do, but usually I'm someone who doesn't wear watches or anything on my body for the most part. But most of the time, the people I'm talking to have a wearable on them, or at least they know what an Apple Watch is, or a Whoop band is, or just any kind of fitness tracker. So that's usually the one I go to, just because I think it's the most relatable to the people that I know.
What is it that you want to know from all of these companies as you do interviews and you've been doing podcasting for quite some time? What is your goal in each of those conversations? What is it that you hope to get from these technologists that you're talking to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think on some level it depends on the conversation, because the research I do ahead of time in these conversations, I'll dive into places and different industries and backgrounds that I don't have a lot of experience in, or maybe are new to me. So there'll be a lot of kind of, just from a curiosity standpoint, things I'm interested in learning. But at a high level, I like hearing different perspectives on how they view the industry and the angle that they're coming at it from, how they view IoT adoption, how they view technology maturing, where they see challenges and problems, and allows me to better understand any commonalities that I see across target audiences, target industries, the hardware to the connectivity to the software kinds of companies. Just getting different perspectives is really interesting to me. And when I see a common thing between them, that kind of throws up a flag to me. That's really something that needs to be addressed or talked more about through my conversations going forward, to just continue to pull the thread on it, because I think it's super interesting to see how different perspectives are, but at the same time, the commonalities that relate to whether it's what's contributing to adoption, what's challenges companies are facing, where they see growth, things along those lines. That's, I think, what at the end of the day, I'm really trying to accomplish is not just do it for myself, but also for our audience, is just give our audience different perspectives, help them learn, help them better grasp what's going on in the industry, hear different experts talk about their insights and ideas. And the whole overall goal is really to just help people better understand IoT and hopefully increase adoption across the board for the industry as a whole.
I sometimes see the work that we do as the stand-in for the audience,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's our job to ask the questions
Sure.
that the listener may be wanting to ask as well. Right. It's the advantage of one of these things. Tell me about, I want to tug on this thread. Tell me about some of the interviews that you've done, just the standout ones where it left you still thinking about, oh gosh, that was a seminal moment, or that was great. Do you have any real standout interviews that if people wanted to hear about some of your experiences that they could check out?
That's a good question. I've talked to so many people that's hard to just put my finger on one. Just recently, I've spoke to a couple, had some really interesting conversations. So I spoke with the AI advisor to the UN the other day. And It was really interesting and very timely because AI has become much more popular topic recently. So that was a really interesting conversation just to hear his perspective on AI and how to make better data-driven decisions, how IoT is, or enterprise IoT is the enabler to enterprise AI. And I think that's a really interesting kind of conversation to have. So that was something that we were talking about just internally. And then when I talked to him, we brought that point up. It really just backed up how powerful IoT is in enabling AI when it comes to the AI models and applications and adoption within the enterprise and commercial space. So that was really interesting. And I think that's continued to just really put more weight behind the value of IoT from a industry-wide perspective. And I think that's something that a lot of people are going to start to make better connections with. Just mainly the reason I bring that up is because over the last number of years, it's always been an interesting conversation to see the transformation of companies not really being sure about how IoT is going to benefit their business to then starting to understand the connection. And now with AI being so mainstream, they're starting to piece it together. Okay, so I understand data. I understand the value of data. I understand how important data is to make decisions. But now, okay, so IoT is what's going to capture the data. Now I'm starting to get it, right? So that was a really interesting conversation to have because it just was very timely and it's starting to just, I think, make sense to a lot of people who were still on the fence of understanding the value.
Yeah, just in general, the understanding that AI is that Porsche engine that needs to have the appropriate frame built around it in order to actually support the higher speeds and the whips around the corner and better braking. There's all of these other things that are necessary. And all of the data that most places collect are disparate. They're in different places, or what we are collecting is just a small pipe. But that's not the entirety of all the data that is collected. And AI gets to make sense of all of it. And you're right. IoT is that bridge between all of those sources of data that right now humans might go around with a clipboard. And it's not in real time, right? AI, the whole point is to quickly identify patterns, not to look in the hindsight and go, 60 days ago, this is what happened. It's this is happening now and might happen again tomorrow.
Right.
Based on what we're seeing.
But it needs that data, right? It needs the ability to collect the data, receive it in the time that makes sense for that individual use case or problem that's being solved. And that's where the technology has come such a long way in the IoT space to enable it. Edge computing is becoming such a big deal. I had a conversation the other day about Edge AI and just why that is helping bring down costs, helping improve the results or the kind of the information that's coming out of these solutions. That's been a pretty cool kind of progress to follow over the last number of years.
So I've personally had a number of either unpopular views or hot takes on IoT over all of the years. And I'll share mine if you'll share yours. So for years, I kept telling people, stop thinking about collecting all the data. Just stop. You're overwhelming yourself. Just pick the one data point that matters. And prove it to yourself that eliminating the clipboard and moving to the check engine light is enough to justify further investment.
Sure.
Because I'd seen way too many examples of project stalling, gridlock internally, or blowing budgets on over-speccing something that may not have actually been able to prove internally, and then you lose funding 12 months after the fact. So what's your hot take?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think it'd be in line with that, and I've had this conversation recently with a lot of people around what it's going to take for IoT to really take off even further than it is. Don't get me wrong, there's more devices out there than ever. There's tons of solutions, but I do believe that, and I hinted at this earlier, is that a lot of the companies that are not in the IoT space and buying solutions for their own business, they care really about, can you solve the problem? They don't care, and I don't mean they don't care, because they do, but they don't focus as much on the technology. And I think
no, they don't care. They don't care.
What's hindering a lot of the adoption is, to your point of start small, see successes, and then scale up from there. But if I'm taking it more from industry kind of wide standpoint, is companies are so focused on promoting the technology and showcasing how powerful their tech is, but adopters care more about the successes and seeing those case studies and things like that. And that's where I think companies should be focusing more of their effort and time. And I started to see this at CES, actually, which I was very happy with. But it's going to take more of that kind of showcasing of success to get people over the hump to want to bring this technology, these solutions into their business. So it's more so stop focusing on promoting the technology and focus more on what the technology can do and the value it provides for businesses is something that I'm not saying I get in arguments with people about this, because I think at the end of the day that we all agree with this, but the companies who are very much focused on bringing a technology to market, not a solution provider per se, they're very close to that technology, right? They built it, they helped develop it, they helped launch it. So they don't want to stop showcasing it. But I think what we're starting to see is that companies need to see its application in the real world connected to a solution to really start to feel comfortable adopting. And a lot of companies are starting to show how their technology is being used in real world solutions, and or real world applications. I think that is a big value for us. So I talk to companies that just build the technological components in the IoT space. I tell them, from what I'm seeing, I really think you should be focusing on promoting what it can do as opposed to just how cool it is or how impressive it is, because a lot of the people that are adopting, that's not what they focus on when they buy.
Yeah, the solving cool technology problems, that's that's good for recruiting.
Yeah.
If you're trying to hire engineers, that's what they want to see, right?
Or if you sell into the industry, right? You're selling components into somebody like a systems integrator or somebody that's building more turnkey or kind of out of the box solutions. That's obviously something you care about. What does the technology do? Does this connectivity solve the use case that I'm building my hardware and my software for? But I think it needs to change in order for people to really understand how to buy IoT.
That comes down to an inability to answer the three evil questions. The three evil questions are from an investor friend who they've spent a career of interfacing with startups and solopreneurs and internal companies. And it's the three evil questions is, one, who is your customer? And this sounds so simple, but he says, I'm actually looking for a very specific answer.
Right.
The more specific, the closer it is to the actual person that pays the money, the better the answer.
Sure.
If you're just describing a problem set, not even a problem, but anyone that's looking for sensor data. Question two is, what is the problem that they're having that you make go away? And the third is, what makes you uniquely suited to address that problem over all the other options out there? Why are you uniquely suited to make that problem go away? And they're evil because they're so simple. And maybe they're not really evil, but they really do cause individuals to stop and think, because not one of those questions has anything to do with the throughput capacity of your processing speed, the battery life of your whatever, right? Doesn't matter. What's the problem that they have?
Sure.
that they're feeling that they want solved, right?
Well, yeah, and there's something about when you mentioned the first one about who is your customer. I've had this conversation in the past that I think's an interesting point to bring up is how we think about who we're building for. And I think it's something that gets often overlooked. Companies and some companies now are doing it really well, but sometimes gets all overlooked of how they're thinking about it. They're often thinking about it from the technology forward as opposed to the end user backwards. And I think if you start to really think about everything from the end user backwards, you put yourself in a much better position to build a solution that is more likely to succeed.
Ryan, the reason why that's so hard is because it takes work. It
Oh, for sure.
requires getting out of the office. It
Sure.
requires building empathy for the people that are actually using it.
Mm-hmm.
And what also makes it difficult is that a lot of times, like, we need to be customer centric, but customers are actually buyers and users, and they're rarely the same person.
Right.
So there's a need to understand the job that's being done on the line, the
Yep.
service technician that's checking chemical levels, but then what is their business model, or who's the person that ultimately would pay for
Right.
that
Right.
service? So now you've got this expanded need to understand
Yeah.
more than just the technology case.
Yeah, I agree. It just became harder for them to make steps forward. I also think to another point that you brought up earlier, as well as mentioned here when you're talking about who is the customer, is a lot of the companies that are going out and selling these solutions, and this kind of goes back to our platform piece of the conversation, is they don't want to silo themselves off from potential business in other industries that could
That's it.
potentially use their platform. And I think that's something
Yes.
that is actually a benefit for companies to consider doing, is to try to focus on and own a niche where you've seen successes, have early deployments that are out there, have more domain expertise, and not feel like if I don't say on my site that my platform is very horizontal and it can work across all these different things, then people aren't going to want to use it. It's you're kind of making it harder for companies. Like, let's put yourself in the shoes of a buyer. Let's say you're a farmer and you're looking for a solution to help track cattle. If you are going to a solution that says, "Hey, we have a platform and that can do everything," it's not going to focus enough. It's not going to showcase your expertise enough to be relatable to the buyer who has a very specific need and wants to find somebody that they can or something they can relate to on your site about cattle tracking. But if you go to a place that says, "Hey, all we do is track cattle. We have hardware that's specifically made to help track cattle. We have these interfaces that are built," and you look at the interfaces and they're spot on with the copy, the verbiage, everything that relates to farmer, says, "Oh, these people know what they're doing." That, I think, is that next phase of making adoption easier, is being able to relate to the customer by being comfortable having a real target audience and not saying you have a target audience, but I want to stay horizontal because that's how we're going to get the most business. When in reality, I think to get the most business is to be a little bit more vertical specific. But that's something that I think is an interesting take and conversation to have too.
That's the whole concept of niching down. Right?
Yeah, sure.
And that's now we're getting into category marketing. You could be a media company that covers technology, but you specifically choose IoT for the commercial and enterprise space.
Exactly.
Right? And that's niching down. So giving people an expectation. If I were an asset tracking company, all my asset tracking tags, they'd work perfect for cows. How do you know? Because they're outside, it's in rural areas. When in reality, all it takes is someone slapping a sticker on it, and it's a livestock tracking tag, right? And you do see that. I think people are afraid of losing out on market share or in opportunities by being more general. We want to sell our product to everybody, anyone that wants to track a thing.
Right.
But the reality is, and this is guys like the category pirates and some of these other category marketing gurus, they go through all of these examples and say, by not niching down, by not committing to a particular area and then making that particular niche successful, one, you don't have the stories, you don't have the competency, you don't have the language, and you don't
100%.
have the testimonials to be able to tell that the holistic story of what success looks like. And all of that fear of missing out, the FOMO, right? Was all for naught. You actually lose more by being overly broad.
Exactly. And I think, and if you just think about yourself as a buyer, when you outside from going like to Amazon or to just like a general places to buy certain products, when you're buying something specific, you usually are looking for a website or a person who understands your pain point. Not just says we understand your pain point, but truly understands your pain point, has built something specifically to solve what you're doing, and then so it allows you to relate more to that. And a lot of times when people are buying or starting their IoT journey, they're going to, let's say again for the cattle tracking, they're going into searching how to track cattle, and they're going to come across 10 different sites that all have all different kinds of content around it. And it's going to be that one site that really is more of a niche focus for cattle tracking that's probably going to do a better job of relating because they have more competency in the space. They understand the problem. They understand the industry. They may have been built by ex farmers and ranchers. There's some connection that buyer is going to be able to relate to. And I think you can carry that across all different areas. And it's interesting, this is not IoT related, but a friend of mine sells Corvettes. He built a site that is basically content marketing to help drive him business for people to buy Corvettes through him. But he's become such a expert in all things Corvettes that rather than going to just a general website to learn about cars and being that was where you're going to buy your Corvette through, he is just so niche focused on Corvettes and is an expert that he's the number one Corvette salesperson in the entire world, not just like the US, in the entire world. He sells more Corvettes than anybody else, sells them to celebrities, you name it, everybody. It's impressive who he knows because of this, but he has been so focused on being the expert in Corvettes that when people want to buy a Corvette, they want to buy it from somebody who understands them and knows what they're looking for. And I think it's a very similar story with IoT solutions because of how unique these problems are that some of these solutions are solving. Yes, you can buy a certain asset tracker, throw it on something and track it. But when you're looking at scale and building these things out for different industries and different environments and different regions of the world, if you can relate to the buyer by showing that competency, that domain experience, or just and really understand their problem, you have a better chance, in my opinion, of getting their attention amongst all the others who say, we do cattle tracking, but we also do rail tracking and pallet tracking and all these other things. But are you really focused on my problem and understand my problem? Or are you trying to focus on just putting your toes in all these different areas just so you might get, you don't try to shut yourself off from these other options like you were mentioning?
To prove that it has nothing to do with technology or features or functionality or product quality, if it was just a business argument, would you make more money? Add the word baby or wedding in front of anything. Bridal, groom, all of a sudden that birthday cake got a whole lot more expensive. Yeah. But I have one example. I'm actually going to grab something from my desk of how things go wrong.
Yeah. I didn't realize you had a Mandalorian hat behind you or a helmet behind you until you moved and then the focus went away. So that's pretty cool.
Yes, indeed. I actually made it on a 3D printer. So
that's impressive.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So my wife wanted a camera for our horse trailer. Because we've got a couple of horses, we've got a trailer, got to pull them in.
Yep.
And when we're going on longer trips, she goes, oh, I've seen that they've got these. So you're the tech guy. Could you research it and figure it out? And I found a product that was listed under equestrian searches. I found a website. It was called Spot Trailer. It had like pictures of trailers and horses and all of the images, even like the mocked up device box and everything. Right. It looked awesome. I'm like, this sounds like it's everything. It's wireless. There's an app that it'll communicate that way. And this is fantastic. And ooh, look at that. It's normally $140. It's $99 right now. Yeah, you know what? I'll go ahead and get it. And I'll get the little memory card in there. And then I waited and waited. And what I got was this in the mail. This exact Wi-Fi camera I could buy right now through Walmart's website for $19.
Yeah.
It was 100%. It is actually the exact same hardware. They didn't even, the box that they advertised didn't even need it. But they just got $80. And knowing that the cost of this to get manufactured is probably $5.
Yeah.
Maybe,
no,
right?
I mean, it's a risk for sure.
So the lesson is you have to be able to follow through. or
Sure.
you're going to get blasted on podcasts and on Facebook.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
do not buy from these people.
Yeah.
They're the worst because they talk. So that same asset, the livestock asset tracker, that farmer that wants to have his livestock tracked.
Right.
If you niche down, though, the exact same thing's going to happen. There are no such thing as they're neutral brand interactions, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
They're always positive or negative.
Sure.
And it's an aggregate of the entire customer and buying experience.
Yeah.
And so niching down is absolutely the way to go. And you can tell someone that's passionate about solving the problems for a specific audience.
I think if we just think about, take yourself out of the IoT space for a second and think about how we buy things in general, when we go look for feedback or reviews on something we're going to purchase or going to do, there are sites out there, for instance, that will just build top 10 lists of like Wi-Fi cameras just to rank and to be visited on their site. But those aren't the ones that most knowledgeable people are going to trust. They're going to trust the Wi-Fi expert website or the Wi-Fi camera expert website that really did their due diligence. And it just comes down to a human level of how do we make decisions on buying things. And it's no different, in my opinion, than buying a consumer product to how we connect to a company to feel comfortable enough to reach out, engage with them on the enterprise and commercial side. And it's being able to relate to that buyer, that problem the buyer faces. And I think what's happened is we've been in a world in IoT where, to your point earlier, we don't want to shut ourselves off from potential business by saying we don't specialize or we don't focus on these areas, we only do one thing. But we're starting to see that in order to really kind of gain traction, gain attention, and have those people who are looking to adopt IoT, they want that. They want a company that is focused and shows that they understand their issue, not the company that's trying to do everything decently. They want someone who does one or two things really well. And that's where I think when we relate it back to just us as general consumers, that's still who's buying these solutions. They're just in a different setting, in a different they have different parameters that are thinking about from the ROI of the company and or of the solution for the company, bottom line, things like that. But it still doesn't mean that they're not a human buying it and how they connect to that potential company or that solution that they're looking for at the time.
My ask of people that are building products is to take their customer and break it into the buyer and the user and be fearless and thorough in their inventory of, okay, who's who, but then think about one more extrapolation. Sure. And that amongst the users, who are the influencers? Mm-hmm. So who is it that is the voice? Is it the safety officer on the manufacturing line who actually oversees the people who use the users are the guys who the Kachunker machines, and then there's all the IoT to keep them from losing their fingers and all that. But the safety officer is the one who ultimately influences whether it's going to enhance their productivity, safety, whatever it might be. And with the buyers, you've got the beneficiaries.
Sure.
It's all of those that are going to see a benefit from the purchase. Yep. And so mapping out just that bifurcation of that customer experience, if you can't answer those questions, maybe you should be able to dig a little bit deeper, because that really makes for a much better messaging exercise, business development, things like that.
And I think there's a lot of times in the IoT space, obviously partnerships are a big deal, right? If you're a software company, you're often partnering with a hardware company. And a lot of times, aside from the hardware companies that are just making quick off-the-shelf devices that can cover a wide variety of use cases, the ones that are making more niche-specific trackers, they usually have done a decent amount of due diligence into that industry, because the investment that goes into those pieces of hardware is pretty heavy, to where they're not just going to build a tracker and guess along the way how that tracker needs to be created for that use case. So they probably have a pretty decent amount of domain expertise, and they've worked with companies, they've tested these products out, they've deployed them. So when let's say a software company partners with a hardware company, those are the things that I think are worth really trying to pick their brain and understand when you build the software component, not just the firmware and that side, but more so like the user interface side, and you're building that piece out.
Yes.
You need to talk to the people who really understand. And I think a lot of times it's often those companies on the front lines, the hardware, for example, are big players in that domain expertise space, that it's worth that investing the time to learn as much as you can before you just bring a solution to market based on what you think the problem is or they need to solve. Whether that's through the hardware companies or actual users or buyers, that investment of time is critically important, in my opinion.
Having been part of product teams going through and doing and vetting vendors, my favorite answer to hear as a buyer from OEMs is, I don't know the answer to that, but we have a partner or a strategic partner that we can introduce you to that I know can and has, right? I think the value of partnerships in this space, IoT is a team sport, full stop, right? It is not something that we can do everything end to end 100% is the whole Bilbo Baggins scenario of not enough jam over too much toast, spread thin, right? Like you really have to pay attention in those early conversations is, what level of ecosystem support and do they play well with others in the sandbox? A company that doesn't have a lot of partnerships, to me, that sends a very different signal as well.
Yeah. And partnerships are critical for sure. And I think it's been interesting to see and talk to companies who pride themselves in saying we do everything in-house, and a red flag usually goes up. And don't get me wrong, there are some companies that I know can do most of it themselves, have experience with hardware, experience with software, and they probably are not obviously building connectivity themselves, but they're working in some capacity with a company. But I've always advised companies that I've spoken with of just focus on finding the right partners that understand your use case, understand your problem, either have the hardware that's going to work, have the ability to create the interface side, the application layer that's going to work for you, and a company that understands connectivity enough to pair you with the right connectivity for what you need, and no need for overkill. Like, you don't always need 5G for everything.
Good luck getting the coverage that you need for it too, right?
But it's just the people that are out there buying, there's just so many decisions for them to make if they were doing it on their own, that when you find a company that has good partnerships and is, to your point, not coming in there trying to be the expert, is willing to learn from the end user, and will do everything they can to find the right components for your solution specifically, that's where I think you start to see, or that I guess cuts out a lot of the potential for any hiccups or potential failures. And you're on a better road to success if you're able to build something and not just taking things because this company is married to this piece of hardware. They're going like, it can work for what you need, or we'll make it work for what you need. That's not what this space has evolved into, in my opinion. There's so many options out there. It's finding the right ones. And that goes back to our conversation of how they market and kind of sell. It's having that domain expertise and really owning their niche, and being able to do that, I think, is what's going to contribute to the long-term success of IoT in general.
That's been the digital transformation journey for most large companies. The not invented here philosophy has been left in the ditch as a corpse. You've got 3M, Dow DuPont, Parker Hannifin, a bunch of household names, like very large companies that as they started adopting digital, realized that the not invented here philosophy just doesn't work. There's only rare instances. If you are a contractor for NASA or a government program or some sort of highly regulated use case where you need to show traceability for every component that you manufacture into this bespoke solution, because you can't have anything that was sourced through China or because reasons, right? So it's think through that one very carefully. We could do everything. Okay, so I'm hearing you can do everything, a lot of things okay.
Yeah, and that's what I've noticed more and more is, and this is I've really learned early on in the space as I was just getting up to speed on what was going on, is companies that think, just like the platform kind of conversation, having a platform that is use case agnostic is just, it's something to really think hard about. Is what are they really selling? How much customization is going to go into it? How much do they really know about the space? How much is it going to cost to really get this agnostic platform to what I need for my unique solution for my end users that have a specific problem to my business. It's a different journey you're going to be on than the ones that are saying, look, we that are building more tailored niche solutions because that's where they've decided to focus their time and effort. That's the same with the hardware, same with all the different pieces. Yeah, it's just something that's been interesting to see companies start to go away from the we want to do it all or we want to be super just agnostic, where it's maybe that's not the path that's going to work for a lot of companies out there.
Speaking of focusing our time and effort, we are at the end of our time for today. So Ryan Chacon of IoT For All, how could people learn more about yourself and
Sure.
the work that you're doing?
Yeah, around myself, you can always reach out to me at ryan@iotforall.com, LinkedIn, connect in any way. I'm usually pretty responsive to all that stuff, so happy to engage in any capacity they wish. On the IoT For All side, we're, like we talked about earlier, kind of full-fledged media across all different channels. So Twitter, LinkedIn, iotforall.com, the YouTube channel with all the different content. Obviously, you and I just had a recording on our channel as well, so that'll be something we get out pretty soon, or if not already, depending on when this airs. So yeah, just search for IoT For All, and on any of the platforms, you should find us. And our goal is to continue to bring that content out but with that niche focus that you pointed at. And that's why we think it's so important to keep educating the world. And I appreciate your time and allowing me to come on here and have this great conversation with you. And for our audience who's maybe not familiar with IoT For All, check us out, and we'd love to engage in any capacity we can.
And I do recommend that any listeners check out their newsletter on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Make sure you subscribe to that. That actually, as the first one just dropped, I really liked it.
It was a cool initiative. We just launched it at the beginning or the middle of February, first edition. I wrote the copy for that one, kind of opinions on the year. But what we're doing going forward is featuring our different partners each week around different prompts that are more timely and get lots of different commentary and insights on stuff happening on a week-by-week basis. Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, because that's a new initiative for us that we've seen really good traction on and we're excited about.
Oh, it's good information, and that's the thing that I appreciate the most. It's the news you can use. And,
yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's been our mission from the beginning. Is we're very careful on what we put out, and it's all vetted content. It's not promotional content. And that's been our intent from the beginning, is to stay away from that advertorial sponsor type stuff and really focus on building a resource that wherever you are in your IoT journey, whatever kind of business you're in, if you're in the IoT space or not in the IoT space, you can come to and get helpful, real information at any stage of that IoT journey.
That's the thing that I appreciate. There's a big difference between founders and technologists that are very passionate about what they've built and a salesperson who is willing to throw anyone under the bus and inflate themselves. And it's just transparent. It's obvious. And it's
we read through it. We read through it, and people don't want to be sold to anymore in the capacity when they're digesting content. So we think the best way to build a relationship with a set audience like ours, which is more niche focused, is to share expertise, share knowledge, build that kind of subconscious relationship through them digesting your content, so that when they're ready to make a decision in the space, hopefully your company, your insights is what comes top of mind, and they reach out and want to engage with you. And we think that's what we've built to enable companies to do, as well as those looking to learn, have a place that is free of that kind of salesy type content, so they can get the information they need.
I made a explicit sales content. No, a warning. I took the label from the old rap albums when I grew up in the 90s. Yeah. It was a parental advisory, explicit language. And I actually remade it. And I copied the fonts and the styling and made vector art. And one of these days, I actually want to slap it on an episode album art, but go completely self-promotional, but throw that on there. And then I made one for contains sales-free content or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's funny. I think we're starting to see that transformation across, and not just different content and resources, but marketing people, content people in this IoT space particularly are starting to really see why that's so important, and going away from the old school stuff of just pay-to-play content, advertorial, like sponsored content that just people don't want to read anymore. So make that native experience, sharing that value, creating those relationships through sharing of that knowledge is where I think a lot of companies are starting to see the true long-term value of. And that's what our goal is, to help companies enable them to do that and build a great resource that we think is doing pretty well.
And then hide it behind a contact us form where you have to give over your contact information.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we don't do that for the most part either. Like, we have some stuff like that our partners put out that is gated to access some of their webinars, but all the other articles, everything is totally wide open. We try to stay away from the gated stuff.
That's just a trend I'm so glad is starting to fade away. It's not 100% no, don't do it. Man, if you spend a bunch of money to create good content, you want people to consume it.
Of course.
So and why get in the way?
Yeah, and we view it as, look, if your content's good and it stands on its own and somebody reads this piece of content, like for instance, this IoT playbook that's getting published on our site, there's no paywall in front of it. But the idea is that the company that created it believes that if you find value in this, you're going to reach out to us. If you don't find value in it, then you giving us your email is just going to be a wasted conversation. Like there's no need for them to collect your email and then hound you and bother you and start to sell to you. It's, look, we hope that we deliver value in this piece of content where you are like, okay, this company knows what they're doing. Let me reach out to them and put it more on the person to when they're comfortable and they're ready to reach out that they'll do that, as opposed to the other approach of getting all this company's email or individual's email and then potentially hounding them when they may not be a fit. So it kind of wastes time for everybody. So let them make the decision, and that's their philosophy. And I think it's one that's changing for sure.
I feel like a dork out completely on just
I know. It could be a whole different conversation. I know we talked about we should just have a conversation about marketing in some point. So we'll have to do a conversation like that and put it on our
marketing your
channels.
IoT product. Yeah.
We hinted at a lot of it today, but like with the selling of it. But I think there's a whole marketing angle for sure. And I've been approached by a bunch of people in the marketing, like CMO roles, who have been like, hey, can we just do an episode about the marketing philosophies in IoT? And I was like, yeah, we don't do a lot of content around that, but we should. So you and I will have to do it for sure.
My venue or yours. I don't know. I don't care. I think it'd be a great conversation.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Take it easy.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Yep. See ya.
This has been another episode of What to Expect When You're Connecting. Until next time.